and more from the experts about the impact of the linear transportation system development on the natural habitat and the biodiversity, system. Now, I would like to request the respected Secretary of the Physical Infrastructure and Transport, Mr. Rabindranath Sharma, with his Rabindranath Shrestha, with his welcome remarks. Thank you, sir. Please.
Good morning and namaste to everybody. At the outset, I would like to welcome all of you joining virtually and physically. Distinguished personalities from ADB, including Karma Yanjan, Event Coordinator, Principal Safeguard Specialist ADB, Marianne, Event Coordinator, Bhupendra Bhatta and Deepak Bahadur Singh, ADB NRM, international and national experts, colleagues from government of Nepal ministries and departments, and ladies and gentlemen. Dear all, sustainable development is a matter of concern and need of today, everywhere in the world. Transportation infrastructure is a growing need of peoples everywhere, and Nepal is one of them. This will provide accessibility and contribute the nation with multi-sector development, direct contribution to increased GDP and poverty alleviation. Lot has to be done to provide accessibility needs of people living in nook and corner of the country. So the government of Nepal has also given high priority in this sector. Nowadays, the world become virtually very small due to technology. Gradually, we are thinking about development for all. We have to think not only environment and climate change aspect, but also the ecological aspect also. In one aspect, we are increasing the development in infrastructure. Side by side, we are encroaching the environment, natural habitats of wildlife, and ancient historical places. Transportation infrastructure like roads, rails, or linear type infrastructure have great impact on the wildlife, jeopardizing their very existence. Many of wildlife and plants have become almost extinct or on the verge of extermination. The structure built in roads and railway projects become a physical barrier and hindrances for their living, growth, and movement, and prevent their propagation. I'm happy that we have already initiated to think and act considering wildlife aspect while developing infrastructure. Naranghat Muling Road is an example where we have constructed underpasses for the free animal movement across the road. Similarly, we have modified most of the cross drainage structure in Naranghat Butol Road, allowing wild animal movements through them. I have been informed that there are more than 25 participants from the different departments and ministries of Nepal government. I wish the training will provide you an insight into the field of biodiversity and teach us to live with the nature abreast. You will be learned how to mitigate the impact of wildlife ecology due to infrastructure development. I wish best of luck to everybody and wish for successful completion of the training program. And thank you. And I want to inform you that I have been busy in this budget preparation. That's why I could not take part in this training. I would like to apologize to everybody and thank you and wish for successful completion of this training. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, respected Secretary, sir, for your valuable comments, remarks. I welcome speech and your presence despite your busy schedule. Now I would like to request respected Director General, Mr. Sibar Sapkata. He is currently the Director General of Department of Roads, and he was Joint Secretary in Physical Infrastructure Transport Ministry before present positions. I would like to request Director General Sir Sibar Sapkota sir for your welcome speech.
Thank you, Sushilji. Respected Secretary, distinguished personalities from ADB, including Bruce Doon, Director, Safeguards Division, Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department, ADB, Karma Yongzom, Event Coordinator, Principal Safeguard Specialist, ADB, Mary Yen, Event Coordinator, Gopendra Bhatt, and Deepak Bahadur Singh, ADB, NRM.
Sir, can you open your video, please? Camera, please. Yeah, okay, sir.
Yeah,
Thank
okay.
Thank
International and national experts, colleagues from ministries, departments, and ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to welcome you all in this wonderful program and all those who are present virtually in this program. Distinguished guests and participants, the government of Nepal has given high priority to the development of the transportation infrastructure. Today, we can see ambitious program in infrastructure development into our periodic plan and as well as in 25 years long-term vision 2043. In this context, the training and planning and design of smart infrastructure and biodiversity protection is very relevant to us. I believe that the trainer will get much more knowledge in this training. In this moment, I remember those days when ADB has organized the program, and I got the opportunity to learn biodiversity protection in linear infrastructure in Brisbane in 2018 with Karma. After that, we have started to work in Naranghat Butol Road. For this, I would like to again thank to ADB for this program. I am remembering those days and practicing this experience in Naranghat Butol Road too. So in this moment, I believe the trainers will get much more knowledge in this regard. For example, we have already initiated for the consideration of wildlife ecology while designing roads like in Muglin Naranghat and as I said in Naranghat Butol Road. The participants will learn more from the training while they will support in future for designing smart linear infrastructure for biodiversity protection. I wish the success of the training and all the best to all of you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, DG sir, for your glorious speech. And yeah, your presence is valuable. Thank you very much. And now, I would like to request Mr. Brisdon, the Director of Safeguard Division, Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department, ADB.
Thank you very much. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be joining you this morning, at least virtually, for this training on planning and design of smart linear infrastructure for biodiversity protection. And I'd like to extend a warm welcome, of course, to everyone that's joining in person at the Rhino Lodge in Nepal, but also to the other virtual participants from across Nepal, as well as other countries. And of course, let me give special thanks and good morning to respected Secretary Shrestha of the Ministry of Physical Infrastructure and Transport, as well as the DG of the Department of Roads. And of course, it's unfortunate today that the DG for the Department of National Parks and Wildlife Conservation is not able to just join right now, but of course, we're very pleased to be working with you still as part of this training and other activities. In fact, we've been working quite closely together, and I was pleased to hear from the opening remarks the importance of that. And I also appreciated Secretary Shrestha's points on the need for development of all, and of course, the importance of placing ecological management and climate change as part of that development process. And in fact, these topics are actually something that's very close to my heart. I'm actually by training an ecologist, and for about the first few years of my career, I was very heavily involved in undertaking ecological assessments for large infrastructure projects, including roads and highways. This was initially in Australia, but then across Asia. And actually, since that time, I've really taken a special interest in how we can design linear infrastructure in a more sustainable way. So I'm really pleased that we're working very closely with you. But of course, there are experiences from the past. I personally have seen and been involved in some projects where I have to admit there was some poorly planned infrastructure that was proposed in habitats for endangered species, or where construction practices didn't really live up to good practices. And of course, when you're constructing in very mountainous terrain, it is a challenge to design projects appropriately. But I'm also equally pleased that over time, as awareness has grown, as capacity has continued to grow, and as there is greater guidance and tools, we're really in a much better position to improve planning and assessment. And I think there's a lot more that we can do to avoid and minimize risks in these types of projects. But actually, among ADB's developing member countries, Nepal is one of the champions for this work. We've seen a lot of good practices already in integrating biodiversity-friendly features into road projects. We also see Nepal as being one of the few countries where there is very close collaboration between an infrastructure ministry, in this case, the DOR, and also the Environmental Biodiversity Conservation Ministry. In this case, we have the DNPWC. And this is something that I would really like to applaud for Nepal. And I think it's something that we would like to encourage in other countries. This close collaboration between planning, management of biodiversity and natural resources is very critical. And I think, of course, we also see this in terms of the representation at this training workshop today. Now, ADB, as a development partner, working with you very closely in Nepal, has, of course, financed several road construction projects. And this has included, for instance, the East-West Highway along the Terai in southern Nepal. And it, of course, passes near to important biodiversity areas, including national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. This includes, of course, the Koshi East-West Highway and Koshi Road, which was part of the Sussex Road Connectivity Project that was completed in 2018. And that road passed through the buffer zone of the Koshi Tapu Wildlife Sanctuary, which is also a Ramsar site. So, of course, there is sensitive issues there. Plus, we have construction works for expanding the Narangat-Buttal Road. This is, again, part of the Sussex program, and this is currently ongoing. And the road there passes quite close to the buffer zone of Chitwan National Park. Plus, there are other road sections which are part of the East-West Highway, which are also proposed for ADB financing. And these also, of course, pass through some of the very sensitive ecosystems that you have. Chitwan National Park, Parsa National Park, and the Baranba Forest Corridor, which is, of course, a very important corridor for the movement of tigers and other wildlife species. So clearly, very careful attention to the road planning and to the assessment and management of biodiversity is going to be very important for these projects. And we have some very good practices and experiences from the past. We just heard mention, for example, of some of the work on tiger underpasses and corridors as part of the road project design. So it's very important that we learn from those implementation experiences and, of course, the challenges that we still face. And equally important is to continue this very good collaboration that we see between the respective departments and agencies. Now, coming to today's event, this training workshop has been specifically designed to inform professionals on developing and maintaining ecologically friendly linear transport projects in Nepal. So we're going to be focusing in on Nepal issues, but also we will have presentations and discussions on road and rail improvement projects from other countries that have similar terrain and similar types of challenges around habitat and wildlife species. So in this way, we can learn not only from the experiences in Nepal, but also regionally. So with that, there's just some brief opening remarks. Let me again wish you a very warm welcome for today. I hope this session is inspiring and useful for you, and of course, practical for your work, but also, going back to Secretary Shestra's remarks at the beginning, it's very important for your country that we find this balance between ecology and other development goals. So with that, let me welcome you, and I'll pass back to the organizers to take us forward. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bose, for your encouraging speech. Yeah, you have very good knowledge about the Nepalese infrastructure development. I'm very happy to hear from you. Actually, the government of Nepal has put the infrastructure development in very top priority because it aids, the GDP contribution and the poverty elevations. And in the recent years, if you see the periodic plan and the long-term plan of Nepal, the infrastructure development, especially in transportation, the government has given the most and the top priority. Recently, some big projects are currently undergoing, and some are under pipeline. Most of them are funded by the ADB, and some are from the World Bank. And the issues of biodiversity protection is emerging issue. We have to comply the bank's guidelines, and the relevancy of this training is there because we with the different government agencies, the participations are from them, and they will learn many more from the experts. The knowledge in the field of the biodiversity and the knowledge in the engineering field shall be integrated, and we have to learn. The participants shall learn from the training. This is the main, the motto of this training. Yeah, before going to the events, I think the schedule of the events has already been distributed to all participants. So before the event session starting, I would like to request all participants to give their introduction from themselves.
Namaste, I am Rakesh Morgan, Deputy Project Director, Project Directorate, ADB, Department of Road. Thank you. Namaste and good morning. I am Mr. Raj Rizal, Senior Regional Engineer, Bridge Branch, Department of Roads.
Namaste and good morning. I am Basudev Kunal, Under Secretary of Finance, DOR BDOD. Thank you.
Namaste, good morning. I am Sampar Singh Dani, Senior Divisional Engineer, Ministry of Infrastructure and Transport.
Namaste, I am Daisy Tamrakar, GC Road Department.
Namaste, good morning. I am Roshan Kumar Dev, Engineer at Department of Railways.
Namaste, I am Samrita Nalai. Good morning. I am Pooja Shrestha. I work in WWF in the capacity of Sustainable Infrastructure Specialist. I'm very excited to be a part of this training. Thank you.
Namaste, I am Rathamansi Bajajani, Project Director,
I am Suresh Kola, Senior Division Engineer, Ministry of Digital Infrastructure and Transport.
Good morning, everyone. I am Dheeraj Lakal, Engineer at Department of Roads, currently working as an engineer at Narayan Road Project sector.
Evaluation Officer, thank you.
Namaste, I am Maurice Prasad Tiwari, Assistant Evaluation Officer, Chief Officer.
Namaste, this is Baburam Manisane, National Transport Network Conservation, NTNC.
Namaste, I'm Clive Buell. I'm a researcher in world ecology. I'm from Portugal.
Namaste, I am Yuvraj, environmental safeguard expert, PDA. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ibrahim. Yeah, I think the event schedule already in your hand. Yeah, for your kind information, we are 28 participants here, in addition to the some organizations team. Now I would like to request the Bhupendra Bhatta, the ADB NRM. He is the senior transport specialist from the ADB NRM, and he will continue this session now. Thank you very much, sir. Please.
Thank you, Susan. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. So basically, the infrastructure development, particularly the transport projects, is very important for the economic development as well as the social welfare of the countries and the people. However, these infrastructure projects have a impacts on the particularly wildlife and the biodiversity, and particular this workshop, next 3 days we'll much talk about the transport project as well as the wildlife ecosystem, biodiversity, natural capital. And the focus of this workshop will be how to integrate these aspects of the in the project planning. That is the main objective of this workshop. With this, however, the transport project have a negative impact with the fragmentation, loss of the wildlife and all, and how to mitigate, minimize this through the planning process in the transport projects is the main focus of this workshop. With this, I will request Mr. Baburam Lamichhane for the next presentation. I will introduce him. Mr. Lamichhane is working with the National Trust of Nature Conservation of Nepal, NTNC, and he is having the long experience with the particularly on these conservation area, and particularly he is the research officer, and he has completed his PhD doctorate from the University of Antwerp and the Leiden University. He has so many research involved in the research activities and more than 50 scientific articles in peer-reviewed journals. Thank you. I will hand over the mic to Baburam Lamichhane. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, all. I'm Baburam, and I'm working with the National Trust for Nature Conservation, and I'm now talking about the biodiversity conservation, and especially focusing on the field experience knowledge from especially Chiton Parsa complex. We all know Nepal is quite diverse from the biodiversity point of view. Although the Nepal covers only 0.1% of the land surface in the world, we have many species, the diversity from the birds, mammals, herpetofauna, butterfly, fish, and many others. So by the representation, it's quite higher than its surface area. So this one picture also shows a lot of this diversity. Nepal is, although a small country, one of the top countries with so many cat species. So this one, this poster shows 13 cat species that are found in Nepal. I think Nepal is only second to India. India has more than Nepal, but Nepal has so many carnivore species. And when there are carnivores, that obviously indicates there are herbivores and many supporting habitat is there. So Nepal is uniquely positioned in the border of two biogeographic realms like Indo-Malayan and Palearctic, and it has high altitudinal gradient, and then also the forest cover is very high, like nearly like 45% of the Nepal is forested. That also supports this high biodiversity. And if we look at the the biodiversity conservation, from the conservation point of view, Nepal was quite famous even before this modern conservation started as hunting ground. So many foreign royalties from Europe, UK, and many other countries, they came for hunting expedition, and we have some recorded history of even killing of many animals. Like in one expedition, they kill up to 120 tigers. That means you can imagine how dense the the animal density at that time. But now all the world viewpoint has changed, and we are moving towards conservation of them in natural habitat. And in 1970s, Nepal has brought many regulations, rules, and then also established the protected area system to support the biodiversity. And now we have guiding policies. Nepal is part of this conventional biological diversity CITES, conventional migratory species, Ramsar, and many other national and international treaties Nepal has signed for protection of the biodiversity. Likewise, we have a national biodiversity strategy and action plan and forest policy, and there are many acts which are supporting on this biodiversity conservation. National Park and Wildlife Conservation Act is the kind of umbrella act which supports for the biodiversity conservation and then establishment of the protected areas and protection of the flora and fauna in the country. Similarly, other like forest and then plant and then soil conservation, Environment Protection Act, which is a provision for the environmental impact assessment and so on. For the protection, Nepal has very unique what we call the system for protection of the biodiversity, from very local level with the community groups to the sectors, then the protected area system, then the departments, and then up to national level, like Prime Minister level. This Nepal has this Tiger Conservation Committee, which is chaired by the Prime Minister, and then Wildlife Crime Control Coordination Committees, which are supporting on the crime control from coordination of different organizations. There are parliamentary committees. Of course, Constitution of Nepal itself also supports for this conservation, and then there are conservation partners, and also for species conservation actions and management plan of the different protected areas. And Nepal's 23.39% of the land surface is covered by the protected areas, which is quite representative, I think, compared to many other countries. So there are national parks, wildlife reserves, conservation area, hunting reserves, and so on. And with this conservation efforts, we have seen the increase in the many wildlife species. New species are also found, like which and the species, especially like representative species like tigers, rhino population has also increased in recent time, which also shows the effort that the government is putting on conservation. Tiger population increased from 121 to 235, and we are now just completed the field survey, and we are working on the next results for 2022. Hopefully, we will get the Nepal government's target of doubling the tigers by this year. 250 was the target set in 2010. Similarly, this rhino population has seen some ups and downs, but it also tells the history of the conservation, when we have done good with the animals, and then when we have there was some problem. So initially, there were more than 800 rhinos. The population crashed with a lot of resettlement program, and then clearance of the habitat forest, and then killing of the rhinos for like retaliatory as well as poaching. Again, the rhino population increased in between 1960 to 2000 with the conservation efforts, establishment of the national parks, and the protection. And then again in 2000, there was an insurgency, and then the security was compromised. Again, the population crashed. And then after that, after the reestablishment of the conservation efforts, now population is growing up, and the rhinos are doing fine, and it's nearly reached 700 in Chitwan, and then 694 in Chitwan and 752 in overall Nepal. But it is not free from the threats and challenges. Of course, there are various threats. This picture is from Bardia National Park, the tiger crossing on the road. Especially the major problem is habitat, because we have very small, like limited habitat remaining. And then that habitat has also a problem with encroachment, and not only from the individual layer, also the communal encroachment, I'll say, because they are building some schools or some, different facilities in the expense of forest. I mean, the encroachment is not only for the individual level, but also for like making some religious places or something, even like expanding road, then the forest will be used. And then also invasive species pollution and extraction, these are causing the degradation of the habitats. Poaching and illegal trade is also a major problem for especially charismatic species like rhino, tiger, elephant. Conflict with communities, people with the animals confined in a small area, and then their density increasing. Also, it's conflict is increasing. We have not done much work in disease, but we have also seen problem with the wildlife disease, and then that could be the problem. And then future, there's a changing climate, and of course, like infrastructure development is also the challenge. So we have realized that after we cannot conserve large species like tigers, elephants, or large ranging species within a small area, confined area, but larger landscape is required. And government has already declared like 5 landscapes, and then 2 more are on like study phase. So Tarai Arc is the oldest, and then Chitwan Annapurna landscape, Sacred Himalayan landscape, Kanchenjunga landscape, and then Kailash landscape. These are like identified landscape. And then other 2, Eastern Tarai landscape from east of the Bagmati River till to the Jhapa area, including the Kositapu Wildlife Reserve, and the other is Karnali landscape that is like under development process, like there are studies going on. So this landscape approach is important to maintain the connectivity between these wildlife populations. I'll more focus on the Tarai Arc because we have some experience already, and it is also the hotspot because there are very important protected areas like Chitwan, Bardia, and then Chitwan is an World Heritage Site. Then Bardia and other Suklafanta and other forest corridors and the adjoining parks, Parsa, Bake. And this is from the tigers perspective is very important because it holds nearly 20% of the global population. The total 881 tigers exist in Nepal, India, Tarai Arc, because Tarai Arc landscape not only in Nepal but it is extended in Indian side also. And in Nepal we have 235, and in India they have like 646 tigers. So from that perspective, it is important, and also there are various corridors that are connecting this forest habitats that are connecting these source populations. These in the circles are the source populations, and then red are the corridors, and the other green shows the forest cover. So it shows there is still connectivity between different populations is possible, but with ongoing our infrastructure development that may be affected. Recently, we have found tiger presence between the Chitwan and Bardia in this forest called west of Butawal area. So we are this road construction is going on this area. So west of that area, Butawal and Kapilvastu, tigers were detected during the camera trap survey, and this shows possibility that still the tiger can go from this population to this population. It's actually we suspected maybe tiger came from this area or this area because the distance between these two. This dot is also camera trapping location, and this all camera trapping location, and this area in between also from the camera trapping. coming to this Tarai Arc and its ecological corridors, because the Tarai Arc its base is based on these corridors, because these corridors link the other forest, and then from that the animals can use that area as a like a connecting habitat. So in Chitwan, we have Barandabar corridor forest, which previously also mentioned, and then Lamahi, and then the between Banke and India's Sohelwa Wildlife Sanctuary. Kamdi corridor is there, and then Khata corridor connects Bardia National Park with the Katarnia Ghat Wildlife Sanctuary. Then similarly, Karnali corridor also is a river corridor that connects Bardia with the Katarnia Ghat. Then Basanta and Suklafata and Duduwa, there is connectivity with the Lalzari corridor, and then also the Brahmadev corridor that connects Suklafata with the other park in India. So these are the major corridors, and most of our landscape, like the infrastructure development projects, are also proposed or ongoing in this area. This Tarai is has high density people, like about half of Nepal's population lives there, and then also there are many infrastructure development plans or proposed, and this is also the biodiversity hotspot. So there is this east-west highway, then also the railway is proposed. This alignment is slightly changed, I think, to this area, but it also comes northern side of the Chitwan and then Barandabar corridor forest. And then also the Indian side, they have a road proposed for the construction, and then of course transmission line, and then canals and many other infrastructure are planned. And if these infrastructure are not made like wildlife friendly, there is all the effort we have done, and then the achievements we have got in last 20, 30 or 50 years will be lost. With the major threat among this infrastructure is a road, because roads are like wide, and then they are like road network is almost everywhere. So it is expected that 18,000 more road will be constructed by 2050, and 880 of them will be in the tiger habitat. So that's also it is identified as a major threat for conservation in the Tal by this Tal Strategy Action Plan, and it can also affect the populations of the recovering populations. So while I think after this presentation, there is a specific presentation about the impact of road, but I'm just highlighting some of the major problems with the road, like direct mortality. Not only direct mortality, it also affects barriers on the movement, then reducing gene flow, and then also increase access to the remote area, because with the road construction, the remote area becomes accessible, and then that will be have an effect on the wildlife here, facilitate human development, or human settlement growth, extraction, harvest, and traffic disturbance. And similar with the tigers also, it has a similar effects. I'll show you some examples what we have learned from this area where doing the wildlife monitoring in last 3-4 years, specifically in this Barandabar corridor forest and the Parsa area, where there is also the plan to make this road 4-lane. So first, coming to the Barandabar corridor forest, it is very important forest corridor connecting the Chitwan National Park, even from Valmiki Tiger Reserve in India and up to the Annapurna Conservation Area in mountains. So it's also crucial part of both Tarai Arc landscape and then Chitwan Annapurna landscape south. And it has like the east-west highway and railway, proposed railway are the major infrastructure that affect. We actually put some camera traps in this area and then studied how the movement of the animals are affected by this road. And we found that there are a total 17 tigers we found in this corridor. 7 of them were resident tigers. Others were just passing because it is corridor. Animals are moving north-south. And also rhinos, leopards, sloth bear, elephant, gaur, wild dog, and many species, more than 32 species we have recorded. And from the tigers study, we found only male crossed like north and south, like they crossed both way, but females crossed only once. If they cross, then they don't cross back again. So they remain always on the, if they cross, then they remain in the northern side. If they don't cross, mostly they remain in the southern side of the highway. So that was the major finding of these 3 years. Similarly, rhino frequently crossed, but some rhinos are, the movement of the rhinos are affected. And this in particular incident, we also recorded there's tiger going towards the highway and then again returning back because it cannot cross. So this kind of records we have very good records. And this one is one example of how this road is affecting on the movement. So this is the movement of the rhino that we recorded with the radio collar movement and radio collar rhino. So the rhino moved on this northern side, and then it moved parallel to the highway, and then it probably tried to cross from that, and then it cannot cross, and then return back on the northern southern side. And this is the point. This is the point where this rhino was died that fell in the ditch during construction of the road also. And then also we have found elephant movement from this corridor, elephant going up down. And I want to show you one example of how this movement of this tiger is affected by road. So this is the movement of the tiger, radio collar tiger, and this is the road, Patlaya, Naranghat, and then from there it is towards Nizgarh. We colored this tiger on that location and on February 14, and then till almost 2.5 months, this tiger couldn't cross this highway and remain confined mostly on this area. And then there was also we have got a very good opportunity when there was lockdown. It was not good for health, but we found a good case here. Okay, so after a few weeks, the tiger crossed the highway because there was very less traffic, and then you can see the movement of the tiger. It covered much larger area when there was lockdown, and then vehicle movement was less. So it clearly we can see from these two scenarios, when there was lockdown and then tigers were confined in that area, and then when there was less vehicle movement with the lockdown, and then all this area is used by this tiger. So this is one tiger we have recorded, but there must be many other such cases of the animal movement restricted by this kind of this road vehicular movement. I think it's the last slide remaining, but yeah. Okay, I think it's taking a long time. So I just want to show on that map where the tigers crossed, because we found around 7-8 different locations where the tiger crossed in the highway, along the highway. And from that, we also could identify where we can potentially put these structures. So this kind of study, especially the color study, are very useful to designing the wildlife friendly structures also. So this is for the case of the tiger, and we also have some information about rhinos, elephants, and the elephants that are using going through this road sections. So I think with this can help also for the designing of this linear infrastructure. And then there are some already practice, we also have the plan to go visit this Budol Naranghat. I think that is and also the Nepal government recently endorsed the wildlife friendly linear infrastructure, which will also be quite, I think, helpful for maintaining this ecological integrity, and then also supporting the tiger, wildlife conservation, including tiger, rhinos, and many other species. Thank you very much. Sorry for a little bit of disturbance with the technical things. Sorry.
Thank you, Baburam sir. It's a very enlightened presentation. Particularly, Lamishan sir has focused on how the Nepal has progressed on the protecting and managing the biodiversity in Nepal, particularly with the 13 national parks and the wildlife reserves. And Nepal have a 13 national parks, and Nepal has extended the area of the Suklapata National Park as well as the Parsa National Park in the recent years. And in 2015 till 2015, we have 10 national parks only. Now the 3 more has been upgraded from the reserves to the national parks. With this importance, and most of these our highways and roads passes through these national parks. That's why this workshop is become very much relevant to mitigate to adopt the measures to protect the wildlife and the biodiversity. However, Lamishan sir, Baburam sir has already more focused on the species available and the endangered because of these highways and road development, particularly Bengal tiger. And yes, in Nepal has done a very good job and achieved more than about the 20% growth per year on the tiger population increase. And he has also given the on the knowledge on the Tarai Arc and the wildlife corridors in Nepal, and proposed projects, particularly on the transmission line and the road projects in Tarai and the border areas. And he has also given the very good example of particularly the wildlife movement in the north-south of the East-West Highway, particularly which shows the barrier effect of the highway development. Particularly, if we look at the barrier effect of the highway development, the wildlife of India has Wildlife Institute of India has done the very good simulation exercise on the National Highway 7, which is exemplary. And yes, Baburam sir has tried to give the importance of the barrier effect of the highways on the wildlife movement. Particularly, all these things. That's why it shows that the integration of the biodiversity and wildlife in planning process of the infrastructure project is very necessary. With this, I will request next speaker of this program as Rodney van der Vree, and he is a technical executive in WSP Australia and the associate professor in the University of Melbourne. And he has a very wide experience in the urban ecology as well as transportation ecology, and the working experience across the globe: Australia, Africa, Asia, Europe, and America. And his most famous work is the award-winning Handbook of Road Ecology in 2015. Thank you. With this, I will hand over mic to Rodney. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you today, and thank you for the invitation. And what I'll be talking about today, once I share my screen, is just about the ecological impacts of roads and railways on biodiversity and others. So let me just get started. So I think just a little cheeky advertisement before I do start. There's 2 things that might be of interest. The first is a new website called transportecology.info, and that's an open access resource. It's designed for non-experts, so anyone can get information from this site. There's 3 main areas: research summaries, so they're summaries of peer-reviewed scientific papers, but written in a blog style, so it's very accessible. And we're working on best practice guidelines and also case studies from around the world. But you can sign up in the top right corner, you can see the subscribe button. If you want to add your email address, you'll get updates periodically. And the other one that I think was mentioned in my introduction, which Clara was also involved in, was the Handbook of Road Ecology. So maybe if you're interested in those, and there's a few of you, we could get a bulk order together and get you some information via those two sources. I think one of the things that's important to keep in mind is, as we talk about the impacts of roads and traffic, it's not just roads that we're concerned about. There's also railways, there's power lines, pipelines, canals and modified waterways. There's walking trails and ski runs, bicycle trails, and also fencing. And these are all types of linear infrastructure that have impacts on biodiversity. And the impacts are similar. They just might differ in how severe they are or how far the impacts extend from the road or the railway itself. There's about 64 million kilometres of roads on the planet at the moment, and that's enough to get to the moon and back about 83 times. And as has already been mentioned, there's massive plans for growth of infrastructure in the coming years. By 2050, there'll be an additional 25 million lane kilometres of roads. 90% of that will be in developing countries. There'll be a massive, almost tripling of the number of cars on the planet. And if there's already traffic problems in many developing countries, that will increase by about 5 times in the years ahead. And individual travel is going to treble to some ridiculous number, 100 trillion passenger kilometres annually across the globe. And there's some massive infrastructure projects planned around the world. This is in where I live. This is my state leader and the transport minister, and they are spending hundreds of billions of dollars over the next 20 odd years building all sorts of roads and railway infrastructure. Globally, the Global Infrastructure Hub, they've got a mandate to just basically make sure there's enough roads and rail projects that are bankable and ready to, shovel ready in the years ahead to keep these big construction companies engaged. And the 20 largest economies are going to spend $60 to $70 trillion in infrastructure in just the next 15 years. So the growth of infrastructure is just crazy. But important nonetheless. So this is just a Belt and Road initiative from China. There's similar plans in Africa, 53,000 kilometres of development corridors planned in sub-Saharan Africa. And they range in terms of whether the ecological impacts. So you can see here the red lines are those projects that are not advisable. There are some that are marginal, and there are some that are supported and recommended from an ecological perspective. And so to the impacts of roads and traffic, this little graphic shows you just in a graphic kind of way, an infographic, the different kinds of impacts. And then I'll go into some of these in a little more detail. But there's, going from the top down, there's wildlife mortality. So animals, as we all know, get onto roads and a proportion of those get killed. The next row down is attraction. Some species are attracted to the road either for the warmth that it provides, like reptiles, or if they're scavengers and they're looking for an easy meal, they may be attracted to the roadside. And then some of those may also end up getting killed. There's barriers or filters to animal movement. So some animals will be turned away well before the road. So there's a zone of changed habitat next to the road. Some of them will get to the road itself. And that's this row here of F, and then they're turned away when they get to the edge of the road. Others try and get on the road, and only a small proportion make it across. Other animals avoid the road entirely. Interestingly, some animals will use the vegetation adjacent to the road as a corridor for movement, so moving up and down adjacent to the road, particularly things like railways. So in snowy, areas, there's less snow right next to the railway, so that's an easy spot to move around. And then, of course, under the road or the railway itself, is habitat loss. I'm just showing you this. This is an old graphic that I've copied from a publication. It's not great quality, but it does. I wanted to show you this one because what we're talking about with most of the impacts of roads and railways and traffic is we don't build the road and then the next day or the next month or the next week or even the next year, we see animals going extinct, but it's a gradual process where things happen along the way. So when you build the road, there's habitat loss initially. So the road is built where this grey square starts, there's habitat loss, the quality of the habitat is reduced, animals get killed, there's reduced connectivity, and over time that leads to a reduction in the size of the population until there's a very small number of animals left, and then there's some sort of random event potentially where the population goes extinct at the very end. So there's something that happens along the way, many things that happen along the way, which reduces the size of that population, and that increases the risk of extinction. And we're trying with all of the things that we'll talk about over the next 2 or 3 days, is trying to minimize the impacts of each one of these threats. So we want to reduce habitat loss, we want to reduce the amount of habitat that gets degraded or the quality, so it becomes less degraded. We want to minimize that. We want to reduce the number of animals getting killed. We want to increase the amount of movement. And if we can improve all of these things, which we'll talk about over the next couple of days, the population size is larger and animals are less likely to go extinct. So from the very beginning, habitat loss, excuse me, is one of the major and first impacts that happen when we build new infrastructure. There's ways to avoid that in this situation. Rather than increasing the size of this existing road, they've actually built a whole new road in the cleared farmland, and this road will be taken up and replanted. So they're moving that into the adjacent areas. One thing I've noticed in some projects in developing countries is the footprint to build the road is ridiculously large. For some reason, this is 150 meters across where the road is going to be about 40 meters wide. So there's massive unnecessary clearing of habitat for many projects that does not need to be cleared to the same extent. So if we can be much stricter in our construction processes, we can minimize a lot of the impacts that happen. Perhaps the one we know the most, we see the most, is wildlife vehicle collisions, and there's some, really concerning numbers. And Clara has just published some work on this as well. Hundreds of millions of animals getting killed each year around the globe. Incredible numbers. And of most concern is that animals getting killed on roads is probably the biggest impact for many species that we have on them in terms of animals getting killed. It's not hunting, it's not poaching. Generally, it's animals getting killed on roads and railways. That is the largest cause of human-caused animal mortality. And this is particularly a problem for rare and endangered species, because they're the ones that already have small population sizes, and any additional mortality is a major problem. And it's not just roads, but it's also railways. Examples here of these little turtles getting stuck in between the train tracks, and they're not able to get up and over the train tracks and escape. So they stay here in the full sun, and they end up drying out and dying. And scavengers. So this bird of prey was feeding on this dead deer next to the railway, and then it too got killed. Barrier effect. So imagine trying to be an animal and trying to cross this road. This is in a protected area in India, but it's also a temple, and so there's large movements of people at this particular time of year, and it would be almost impossible to cross this even narrow road at this particular time. And the question you could ask is, well, why is it a problem if animals can't move around? And it's because animals live in separate populations or subpopulations. And so these circles represents a different subpopulation, and the animals need to move, between these different subpopulations in order to survive. So maybe they're getting food in one area and they're sleeping in another, or maybe they need to migrate from one patch of forest to another grassland between winter and summer. So animals need to move at a range of different scales, spatial scales, distances, and different times of year, depending on their particular needs. And when we build a road, if we build that road in the wrong spot, it can have major impacts, not just on the population that has been impacted, but also on those other populations, the small populations that might be connected to that larger population. So the first population that gets impacted is the major one where the road goes through, then these small populations on the side are impacted, and maybe there's others that flow on over the next 10 or 20 years become impacted as well. And so what happens, we haven't just wiped out one population, we've wiped out about 5 or 6 of these subpopulations. But if we think carefully about where we build the road, and if we could build a road like this situation here, it would just be one population that gets impacted if we could build the road to avoid those other locations. There's also this concept called a road effect zone. And this is what this is it's the area over which the impacts of the road and the traffic can be measured and can be felt by the animals and by the environment. So can extend up to thousands of meters. A recent example in Africa found that this road effect zone was actually 18 kilometers for a species of chimpanzee. And the size of this road effect zone is impacted on a range of things. So traffic volume, so larger roads with more cars and more trucks have a bigger road effect zone. If it's flat land versus mountainous land, then it extends much further on that flat land. Downstream and downwind from the road is larger and more severe than upstream and upwind. Where the vegetation is less dense, the road effect zone will be much larger. And all these things combine, and it's been a study in the United States which found that even though 1% of the United States physically had a road built on it, about 20% of the land of the United States was affected by this road effect zone. So even though we might think the road is quite narrow, maybe 50 meters wide, maybe 75 meters wide, depending on the size of the road, the impacts can be measured and felt over much, much larger areas. One of the reasons for that is light pollution. So this is Dubai by night, and you can see clearly where the roads and the infrastructure is. And lighting is a really critical stimulus in the environment, because animals and birds particularly, they will use the light to guide their migrations. They will trigger when it's time to start breeding, choice of mates. It has impacts on their physiology. So if they're active at night when they're normally sleeping, but they're now active because there's more light available, they can change their whole biology and ecology. There's good examples of, it's a bad example, but it illustrates the point that birds on oil rigs and towers, they will circle these towers because the lights are there, and they end up dying because they collide with other birds, or they collide with the infrastructure, or they just run out of energy and die. Similarly, turtles that hatch on beaches, instead of turning left to go to the ocean, they turn right to go to the street lights. And they think that the street lights are actually the moon over the ocean. So of course they head towards the streets, the lights on the streets, and they get run over on the roads. And also significant impacts on migrating birds. And if they're flying from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere and there's too much lighting, that can disrupt their migration paths. Noise, significant impacts of noise. There's construction noise. So construction's relatively short term, but it can be very intense and very loud. And if you're not careful, things like fish, for example, can actually die from really high intensity noises, particularly if you're obviously building piers and so on into water bodies. If you don't do that in the right way and you just start banging those things into the ground, the fish, it's called barotrauma, and the gases in their body expand and they can die. Once the construction's finished, we then move into the traffic noise. This is, there are peaks and troughs, obviously, when there's peak hour traffic at certain in the morning and the afternoons when most people are driving, but generally it's 365 days a year of traffic. That's stressful for animals. They may not be able to hear each other. They may not be able to hear their prey or their predators, so they can't feed as well, or they get eaten more often. And that can lead to temporary or permanent hearing loss in some species. So real significant impacts that we're just beginning to understand now about the impacts of traffic noise and indeed construction noise as well. This was mentioned by the previous speaker, issues to do with further land clearing. Once you build the main road, which is down the middle of this up north-south, if you like, through this area in the Amazon, and that led to a whole range of illegal land clearing via these smaller roads off to the side. Particularly problematic in some developing countries where the controls on illegal activities, poaching, hunting, etc., is lacking. I mentioned just then that there's increased poaching, but it's also bushmeat hunting, so just food supplies for local people, happens at a much higher rate once roads and paths are built through the forest. There's increased access by tourists. And of course, this is why we build roads sometimes, because we want to increase access. We want to make it easier for people to get their crops to the market and less spoilage of food on the way. But we have to balance the ecological impacts with the economic ones and the social ones. Just a real simple example. This is in Australia where I live. There were native grassland patches. So prior to Europeans arriving in Australia in the late 1700s, this light green colour you can see were all the native grasslands originally. They have all been cleared except for these dark green, which were present in 1986. So the dark green grasslands that still existed in 86. We then built a couple of major roads, and the red represents those native grasslands that were cleared after building some new major roads. And what we found was that if a grassland, the probability that this grassland would be cleared, that's the blue line, there was almost a 100% likelihood that those grasslands would be cleared if they were within 1 kilometre of a major road. So that's, even in Australia, we've got pretty good clearing controls. These impacts are happening, it's not just in remote wilderness areas. Of course, there's impacts, building roads in the wrong places, severe erosion, downstream impacts as well that we need to be aware of. And I want to leave you with this graph again, because this really highlights the different ways in which roads and traffic impact biodiversity and wildlife, how the population sizes get reduced, and eventually there is a high risk of extinction, and that's where local populations go extinct. And I'll finish there. Happy if there's any questions now, or if we want to take them at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rodney. He has highlighted the worldwide growing demand of particularly the road development or infrastructure development, in the future, particularly post-COVID has intensified the global priority as an investment on the infrastructure. And he has given example of the One Belt, One Road initiative started by the China and the similar other initiative. And he has much focused on the specific impact of the road development on the wildlife and particularly habitats. And particularly he has nicely explained the loss of wildlife, mortality, habitat loss, quality of habitat, reduced habitat and all. He has also highlighted on the particularly the effect of the behavioral change, particularly due to the light as well as the construction and the traffic noise due to the road development or other infrastructures. With this, yes, this has triggered that this kind of the initiative has to be inbuilt or integrated from the planning itself and the on the infrastructure development, particularly the road construction, highway development. Thank you. With this, now I will open the floor for the 20 minutes question answers for 20 minutes. Thank you.
But sir, yeah, on more information, yeah, all the virtual participants are requested to put their questions in the message box.
Yeah. Any questions from the participant who are in the hall, present in hall?
I have a question to Babu. Based on the radio collar for tigers in the Baranabar corridor, what do you suggest in terms of, with the upgrading of the roads, what do you suggest to do in terms of mitigation over there? Is there any specific place in Baranabar corridor, or should be all the Baranabar corridor, for example, that should be mitigated? My question was to Babu Ram. Based on the data on the radio collar for tigers, I'm asking to Babu to say if he has any suggestions in terms of mitigation for the Baranabar corridor and what type of mitigation should be there, or if there is any specific place in Baranabar corridor to mitigate.
Thank you for the question, and it's very important because we have some information already from that area. Actually, we don't have the tiger collared information in Baranabar, but we have that information from the Parsa National Park. The Baranabar we have information from the radio collared from elephants and camera trapping information from tigers. Like for the tigers, camera trapping based information, but it's like 4 years long camera trapping work, so that we have some information about where the tigers were going and they couldn't cross, and then we also have information like where the tigers successfully crossed. So I think we can share those information. Ideally, of course, it will be good if we can cover all the Baranabar as a underpass or overpass. But if that is not possible, we think based on the animal movement, we have certain areas like close to the eastern border. There is one particular location where there is both sides they are using from the animal trails, and then that area. One side is near the middle. There is a check post where they have this movement trails they are using frequently, and then one in the western side, a little bit I think 200 or 500 meters from the edge. Actually, it's probably because of the fence on the both side. They are coming near these borders and then crossing from these bordering points. It could be because of the fences on the both side, and then they are following the fence, and then they are crossing close to that area. So that's what our finding is. In case of Parsa, then we have very good information with this tiger crossing multiple times. Unfortunately, I couldn't show due to the technical problem in the map there, but yeah. So we have that information where the tigers crossed multiple times. So that means that is indicating that is the area where we can focus building if we target for tigers. But also we have information for the elephants crossing, but it's not from the radio call, but from the movement records. Yeah, and also park warden is here, like assistant warden. He also knows probably where the elephants are crossing. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be very happy to provide that information.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Any others? Yes, Mr. Padam.
Thank you, Bhupen sir, for the opportunity. Now, it is about the wildlife friendly infrastructure guidelines. Recently, the government of Nepal has approved wildlife friendly infrastructure construction guidelines. And during the preparation of that guideline, WWF has also played a vital role during the development of that guidelines. And after it is about the 6 years that has been approved. And my question is that MOPIT and the department approved that how they are going to incorporate that guidelines during the construction of the road. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir, for these questions. Yeah, the government of Nepal has, already endorsed these guidelines, and it has taken a long time. And the biodiversity protection in the construction, we have already initiated, especially in the bank-funded projects. You can see in the Butwal Naran Ghat, and we are now designing the Pathalai Naran sections under the ADB financing. And this stretches two national parks, the Porsa and Chito National Park are there. And the issue we discussed, the presentation by Dr. Lamichani, we have seen the stages where the the critical areas are there, and they are using some stages of national highway. And while operations, the care will be taken, and it is under the study. And the consultant, the ISA consultant, has proposed the mitigations and infrastructures, and we have to discuss. And there is always, the balanced approach to be adopted, because the government is also facing the scarcity of the fund. And if we have to see the sustainable development. We are also the signatory of the international treaties. We have to comply their guidelines, requirements, and on the tap, the development for all. The development not only to the people, development for the all, consider all ecological aspects must be there. And especially consider climate change, environmental issue, and the biodiversity issue. We have in the previous experiences, we are trying to accommodate the corridor for the biodiversity or for the wildlife while designing the cross-drainage structures, bridges, and the small culverts. We have changed the size of the culverts, size of the bridges, consider the openness index required for the concerned specific animals. And we also try to construct the additional structures like overpasses, underpasses, even if there are not, the cross-drainage structures requirement. So in this way, we are going to incorporate the issues in the design. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Sushil sir, with your commitment and the information that the DUR or MOPIT, your organization, is already sensitive with this particular wildlife as well as the natural habitat, wildlife and the habitat, and protecting that. And you are taking care of these protection and the necessary measures, mitigation measures, while designing and implementing the projects through the sensitive areas. And in absence of the guideline, also following the world's best practices. However, when the government has already approved and inherited the guideline, of course, your organization will follow those guidelines as well. Thank you with that commitment for the future. And I invite other questions, please.
My question is actually for Rodney. And it was very interesting to hear, Rodney, that actually in terms of the scale of the deaths of wildlife, it is much more from the vehicle-wildlife collisions in comparison to poaching and other forms of killing wildlife by human beings. So in terms of the extinction of species, is there any data where we have see that there has been a particular wildlife species has gone extinct specifically because of transport corridors? Is there any data which states that? And if there is, what species?
Yeah, really good question, Karma. I'm not sure whether there's actual, and Clara, if you know an answer to this, then speak up. But I don't think there's any species that have actually gone extinct from roadkill per se. But roadkill was just one of the many factors that contributed. So there's habitat loss, there's competition, there's mortality from roadkill, there's mortality from hunting, mortality from climate change or disease. So there is rarely a single cause for extinction. It's usually multiple factors that contribute, and depending on the species and the situation, roadkill can be one of those significant factors that contribute.
Yes, thank you, Rodney. Yeah, I imagine it'll be like a combination of factors, and it's, I guess, hard to separate out the different causes. While we have you and the nice structure behind you in the picture, and PD sir, actually, we need to have something like this for the monkeys and the langurs on NB Road. So maybe we can learn a bit from Rodney about the structure behind you, what species use it, and what kind of material is used for constructing, how easy, how expensive it is to build.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this structure here is basically a rope ladder that goes across a road. This particular location, it's about 70 meters long. You can install them between. So here you can see a pole. I don't know which way to put my head. There's a pole, a timber pole at one end, at both ends. It's about 8 or 10 meters tall. Then there's ropes going off into the trees at each end. And this is designed for possums, so marsupials, and so possums and gliders. So the gliders are about 200 grams, like a flying squirrel. And then the possums are about 1 to 2 kilograms in weight. And there must be 50 to 100 of these built around Australia now, really simple, really cheap. So compared to building an underpass, these are super cheap. Maybe depending on the construction material, maybe $10,000, $15,000 each to build, compared to an underpass that might be, $100,000 to build. I've also seen them now there's some examples in Malaysia, which are basically old fireman hoses. So fire hoses, a canvas fire hose, and they're just putting those between trees across the road. So it really depends on the length. So this has got steel cables on each side as strength to make sure it doesn't collapse onto vehicles. But yeah, for smaller roads, we've installed them in trees without the timber poles. And there's a number of different designs that I've seen now in South America. They're looking at sort of a U-shaped structure, so the animals are less likely to fall off onto the traffic underneath. But we've never had animals fall off these. These are animals that live in trees, so they're very good at climbing and jumping and things like that. But very effective and very cheap.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rodney, because we need to build a few of those for the NB, the Naranghat Butwal Road.
Thank you, Rodney. With this, if we don't have any question in the floor, then we'll break for the tea break, but it will be only for the 10 minutes. Maybe not later than the 11:15. We all will gather again in this hall. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Happy coffee time, Rodney.
Yeah, thank you. Afternoon tea for me.
Now the next presenter, I will request the next presenter, Mr. Sushil Babu Dhakal, to present his presentation on transport infrastructure in Nepal, current and future planning. And Mr. Dhakal is the project director in the ADB projects, project director, Department of Road. He has more than 15 years experience in the construction and management of road and bridges, and he has a quite good knowledge of the project management expertise and in highway and bridge construction under pretty condition of contract. Now I will hand over the mic to Mr. Sushilji. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start my presentation. My presentation topic is transportation infrastructure in Nepal, current and future planning, outlines of the presentations, overview of the transportation sector in Nepal, current periodic plan, expected results, long-term vision 2043. This is the 25 years long-term vision of Nepal, legal frameworks, institutional frameworks, issues and problems, challenges, opportunities, and key initiatives and the way forward. Let me start from the overview of the transport sector in Nepal. If we consider the transportation system, road network covers 90% of the overall transport systems, whereas the air transport system covers 8%, and the remaining rail, rope, and oil is only symbolic, only 2% weightage on the system. 90% of the goods and passenger transport services covered by the roads, altogether 74,756 kilometer roads already in Nepal. If the 84.87% population are reaching all season roads within 2 hours. If we consider the air transportation, 2 international airports, including the TIA and the Gautam Buddha International Airport, which is in operation from the 21st April this year, and 4 regional hub airports, 7 high traffic regular domestic airports, 10 regular domestic airports, 20 non-operational airports are in Nepal. Railway, only 35 kilometer long railway in operation since 2nd April 2022. And the Bijilpura Bardibas section 17 kilometer already completed. If we say about the waterway transportation, there is no commercial water transport system in Nepal. However, rafting Trishuli and the Kaligandaki rivers is very popular. Some lakes like Kheva, Rupa, Begnas have boat services. Let me show some the overview of the highway network. This chart shows the total length of the national highway network. This is as per the decision of the cabinet on the September 19, 2019. Altogether, 14,913 kilometer national highway networks have been engaged. Out of that, till today, till the last fiscal year, the existing total length of the national highway network is 11,178.92, and this is the data from the statistics of national highway published by the Department of Roads. This is, the data. This data shows that the influence per kilometer of the roads, the population influence per kilometer of the roads. If you see the data, the Madhya Pradesh, 6,118 people are influenced from 1 kilometer road. And the data may provide some misconception also. So we have to see the road density data. Here you can see in the Karnali, the road density is the lowest one. and in the Lumini, the road density is the highest one. And if we see the global scenario, the USA has the road density 70, that is 70 kilometer per 100 square kilometer. Nepal, 7.58 kilometer per square kilometer. We are talking about the national highway network. And Nepal's target by 2043, at the end of the long-term plan, 100 kilometer per 100 square kilometer. But if we see the same data, considering the total road network, including the provincial and the local road networks, the data are a bit different. The Madhya Pradesh, 891 peoples are enjoyed with a per kilometer of road. And in the case of the Karnal is 360 peoples are enjoyed with 1 kilometer road. If we see the density and the Karnal province, only 15.58 kilometer per 100 square kilometer. In the case of the Nepal, it is 391. The people influenced by 1 kilometer of the road, and only 50.68 kilometer per 100 square kilometer road density is in Nepal. Okay, I am going to show you the expected results from the 15th plan. This is the 15th periodic plan of the Nepal in the road transport sector. The number of households with transport within distance of 30 minutes will have increased from 82 to 95%. This is the expected results. A total of 1,078 kilometers highways, including East Highway, Kathmandu Tarai Madhya Expressway, will have been upgraded to 4 or more lanes. Middle Highway, Coastal Highway, North-South Highway, and Karnal Corridor will have been constructed and upgraded to 2-lane highways. Standard for national highways, provincial highways, local road network will have been prepared and implemented. Road connecting Manang, Mustang, Mugu, Dolpa, and Humla district headquarters will be blacktopped. If we consider the air transport, Gautam Buddha International Airport and Pokhara International Airport will have been completed. But fortunately, Gautam Buddha International Airport has already been completed and is in operation. Construction of Nizhghat International Airport will have been started within this, the 15th plan. Tribhuvan International Airport will have been upgraded. If we consider the rail transport, East-West Railway prepared to will be completed. The total of 306 kilometer railway connecting the Kakarvita Inarua section, Jayanagar Janakpur, Bardibas Nizhghat Birgas section, Jogwani Viratnagar section will have been completed and brought into operations. And cross-border railways, Jalpaiguri, Kakarvita, Nautuna Vairava, and Nepalganj Railway will have been constructed and brought into operations. DPR investment modality for the Begans Kathmandu, Raswagadi Kathmandu, and the Lumini Kathmandu Pokhara will be completed within this periodic plan. Let me show you some long-term vision of Nepal in next 25 years. The national and provincial highway, it is charged 33,000 kilometers of the road will be there. The lane of this road will be at least 2 lanes, and the families with access to motor transport within 30-minute travel will be 99% from existing 82%. And national, sorry, this is repeated. National highways more than 2 lanes, including the fast tracks, will be 3,000 kilometers. Now it is 96 kilometers. And the rail networks will be 2,200 kilometers. Now it is 42 kilometers. You can see the ambitious target of the government within next 25 years. Okay, let us see the legal frameworks. The first national aviation policy in 2050, the guiding and the top policy, National Transport Policy 2058, that is 2001, is in place. Now it is on the process of updating. National Civil Aviation Policy 2006, Local Infrastructure Development Policy 2003, Public Procurement Act, Environment Protection Act and Regulations, Private Financing, Build and Operation of the Infrastructures 2006, Sustainable Goals, the international treaties, etc. And the institutional frameworks, Department of Force is the agency, dedicated department for the national highway networks. Similarly, the Department of Local Infrastructure is responsible for the provincial highways and the local roads. Civil Aviation Authority of Nepal responsible for the airports, and the Department of Railways dedicated for the rail networks, and the Department of Urban Development and the Building Construction for the urban transportation infrastructures, and the Road Boards Nepal dedicated agency for road maintenance funding, and Investment Board Nepal functions as a central fast-track government agency established to facilitate economic development in Nepal by creating an investment-friendly environment, mobilizing and managing domestic as well as foreign investment. Let me go to the issues and the problems in the field. Inability to achieve the integrated development of transport infrastructure as expected, implementation of the project without proper preparations, lack of availability of the quality construction materials and the river-based construction materials under the jurisdiction of the local governments, lack of public ownership of road as expected, inability to meet the increased needs of the resources for operation maintenance with the increase in the length of the road, lack of integrity, coordination, frequent transfer of the project officials, weak contact management, lack of skilled technical manpower and court interventions, no integrated transport master plan. These are the key problems and issues. Let me present you the challenges we are facing. Maintain a balance between the technology, cost and quality in the construction of the road infrastructure with the limited availability of the investment. Address challenging geological and geographical conditions in Nepal. There is challenge of selection of the prioritized projects despite political pressures on small scattered projects. Challenge and implement the concept of project bank. We are facing challenge to attract investment through the public-private partners in transport infrastructures. Ensure necessary interagency coordination in planning and implementation. This is also a big challenge. Complete all preparatory phase before the project implementation. We are also challenging in this basic requirement. Enhance the professional capacity of the private sector and the attract private sector investment. They are the big stakeholders, and we are facing, their professional capability. Build balanced, safe, sustainable, environment-friendly, and quality road infrastructure in prevailing conditions without enhancing the institutional capacity. Yeah, this is challenging. How to enhance our institutional capacity? Now there are big opportunities also. Let me show you some opportunities. Yeah. Mandate of all three levels of government about road constitutions. Construction already mentioned in the constitutions. Government has given high priority for the development and strengthening of the road networks in the period plan and long-term visions. Dedicated department and professional management of the national highway network. Interest of the bilateral and multilateral development partners in investing in the road infrastructures. Use of technology in the project management. Avoid possible risk and adopt best practices from the experience of the neighboring and the developed countries. Engage youth in works and create social stability. Prevents brain drain. Growing interest of neighboring countries in the operation of cross-border railway services. Sustainable development opportunity. Now, in Nepal, we are in the stage of development of the infrastructures, and we have big opportunities learning from the neighboring countries and the developed countries. There are some key initiatives I would like to highlight some. East-West Highway, Bhutto Naragat on under 13 kilometer, Kambala Panchayat 87 kilometer is under construction under the financing of the ADB. Abu Khairani Pokhara 90 kilometer highway is also under construction under ADB financing. East-West Highway Kakarpur on 20 kilometer also under process of procurement under ADB financing. Moglin Abu Khairani 10 kilometer highway is also under process of procurement. It is also under the ADB financing. Road safety policy documents have already been prepared under the TGA of the ADB. National Highway Network Master Plan and the Priority Interest Plan is under preparation under the TGA of the ADB. Design of Pathalaya, Narayanaghat on 100 kilometer and Budal Gorsi 50 kilometer for upgradation of those stretches of East Highway up to 4-lane standard under the ADB financing. Pathalaya, Narayanaghat of East Highway is a pipeline project for starting implementation on 2023-24. This is also ADB financing. Budul Gorisinghe is a pipeline project for starting implementation 2022 by the ADB World Bank financing. Feasibility study of East-West Railway and the Kathmandu and Pokhara Railway. Completion of the DPR of East-West Electrified Railway. Completion of 2 cross-border railway. Jayanagar, Janakpur, Bardibas and Badnath Viratnagar Railway with Indian assistance. Completion of the Siddhartha International Airport and Bhairava in operation from 21st April 2022.
Sir, if you can please click
Pokhara
on...
International Airport will be in operation by the end of this year.
Go on, Karmaji. I'll give the message.
Narrowed.
He cannot hear you.
Construction is completed. Bardibas Nizgat Railway under construction. Raxol Kathmandu Electrified Railway project preliminary engineering and traffic survey completed. MOU signed for final location survey in October 2021. Bardibas Nizgat Railway under construction. Kiru Kathmandu Railway pre-feasibility study completed. Feasibility study stopped due to COVID-19 effect. Let me show some key initiatives towards the sustainable development. Okay, the provision of the procurement through users committee in the public procurement regulation already included these provisions in the regulations. Strict compliance with environmental and social issues as recommended by the respected study reports. Design considering the wildlife as in the case of the Narayanaghat Budul, Narayanaghat Muglin, Kakardar Logohi and the Pathalaya Narayanaghat Village Highway Assistra. The consideration of climate change on the design, considerations of the vulnerable users in the design, capacity development training within the project contract, compensations to the affected, and strict compliance with road safety protocol. These are the key initiatives already started. And some way forward, please. Formulation of integrated national transportation master plan is today's requirement. Exploration of the appropriate alternative method of financing needs to fulfill the national resource gap. Formulation of new policies and modification of current policies, plans, rules, and regulations. As I already mentioned you, there are rules, policies, but it's got to be updated. Implementation of the project incorporated in master plan, sector plan, and the PIP only after completing the prepared works. Need capacity building, technology transfer, research in all institutions in coordinated manner, adhere with quality assurance and monitoring evaluation framework in transport infrastructure projects. Support the infrastructure is to support for the tourism, agriculture, hydroelectricity, carbon emission, and the climate change issues shall be incorporated. Strategic goals and poverty reduction shall be the top priority. Linking neighbors and beyond shall be our vision. And all these are towards the sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sushil sir. with your, you have given the very comprehensive presentation on the road development and way forward challenges and all. In this regard, like you have presented on the road statistics, with the covering the all mode of the transportation available in Nepal and the future plan. And you also highlighted on the legal framework and the X regulation available for the road or other mode of the transportation development of the other mode of the transportation systems. Yes, of course, like the Gautam Buddha airport has recently completed an operation. This is also one of the ADB supported projects. Thank you for that. And actually, you have given the statistics on the road density, particularly with the 2 hours walk distance to reach the road head, as well as the future plan of the 82% of the 30 minutes walk at the moment, and the 99% density covered for the 30 minutes walk to reach the road head in 43-44 time. And particularly, like you have also highlighted on the development of the transport system in Nepal, challenges, issues, problems, and you also highlighted on the opportunity available, like the high priority of all 3 tier of the government, as well as the dedicated institutions available, professional manpower in the institutions. With this, thank you for this comprehensive presentation on the road development and future plans. With that, now I will request Mr. Vishwanath Woli for the next session on particularly national and international legislation and agreement on nature conservation with the implication of myriad infrastructure projects.
So I'm going to talk next 20 to 25 minutes on policy and legislative instruments in relation to nature conservation, especially focusing on linear infrastructure projects. Regarding biological resources in Nepal, so Nepal is rich in biodiversity, both flora and fauna. We have almost 45% of forest cover.
Polisher, just a minute, sir. The people who are having the virtual connection, they are listening, but the people in hall, they are not listening. We are fixing the issue.
Should I wait for a few minutes?
Thank you, sir. Sir, you can continue, sir.
Okay. So Nepal is rich in biological resources. So we have almost 45% of forest cover and almost more than 30,000 plant species. And we have 35 forest types. And there are several forest management modalities, right from the community forest to government managed forests. Regarding wildlife resources, so we have 23.4% of the total land is covered by protected areas that cover national parks, wildlife reserves, conservation areas, and animal species. We have more than 17,000 species, and we have 20 protected areas, and ecoregion 12 and ecosystem 118. But the ecosystem type study is going on, and I think the new result will update the number of ecosystem type in Nepal. This is the map of protected areas in Nepal. It covers national parks, wildlife reserve, hunting reserve, and conservation areas. Altogether, we have 20, out of which 12 is national parks, and 1 hunting reserve, 1 wildlife reserve, and 6 conservation areas. Regarding World Heritage Site, this is the global figure. In relation to Nepal, we have only 4, out of which 2 are cultural sites, Kathmandu Valley and Lumbini, 2 natural sites. These are Chiton National Park and Sagarmatha National Park. Regarding Ramsar sites in Nepal, we have almost 60,000 hectares of internationally important Ramsar sites, altogether 10 in number. It, includes from Mai Pokhari of province number 1 to Ghodagodi Lake of Sudur Paschim province. That is also visible in map. So regarding international commitments that Nepal has been a party. So according to the literature available from the Ministry of Law, Justice and Parliamentary Affairs, so Nepal is a party to more than 165 agreements and only signatory to more than 27 agreements. So out of these large number of agreements, so there are almost more than 1 dozen multilateral environment agreements while Nepal is a party. These are United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and 2 subsidiary protocol and agreements, Kyoto Protocol, Paris Agreement, then Convention on Biological Diversity. So there are also 2 subsidiary protocols, Nagoya Protocol and Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, then Desertification Convention, then CITES, Old Heritage Convention, then some chemical conventions, Basel Convention, Rotterdam Convention, Stockholm Convention, then United Nations Convention on the Law of Sea, although we do not have access to sea, but Nepal is a party to this convention as well. So these are the international commitments on multilateral environment agreements from Nepal. And Nepal has also committed on achieving sustainable development goals, basically on nature protection and biodiversity. So goal number 13 and goal number 15. So these 2 goals are related, and there is global target of 169 and indicators 244. But Nepal is not related to goal number 14, that is life, well of water. So Nepal has targets of 159 and indicators 245 based on the global sustainable development goals. And the National Planning Commission has prepared one report mentioning the national targets and indicators for all sectors, including biodiversity, climate change, environment, and other sectors. So this is one of the examples on IFC environment and social safeguards. There are 8 safeguards, and biodiversity has been placed as one of the performance standards for securing the environment and social safeguards. So regarding key policy instruments in relation to biodiversity in Nepal, so we have international commitments, as I said earlier. There are more than 1 dozen multilateral environment agreements, and also the Sustainable Development Goals, which is non-legally binding instruments, but Nepal is committed to achieve those goals. There is also National Periodic Plan. Currently, we have 15th 5-year periodic plan, and there are a number of sectoral policies. Few I have mentioned here, like the Local Government Operation Act, National Forest Policy, National Environment Policy, Forest Act, and Provincial Forest and Environment Acts. And overall, the Constitution of Nepal is the overarching legal instruments for Nepal. In detailing out those policy and legislative instruments in Nepal, so I have categorized into 5 time period: before 90, before 2000, before 2015, and 2015 to till now. There are new legislative and policy instruments after promulgation of the Constitution of Nepal in 2015. So I think it is a long list to mention. So basically there are policies and legislative instruments for nature and biodiversity conservation, especially the National Forest Policy, National Environment Policy, National Climate Change Policy, Environment Protection Act and Regulations, Forest Act, National Parks and Wildlife Conservation Act, and all other, policies, strategies, and, acts and regulations and guidelines as well. So in detailing out, those provisions, so our constitution has mentioned few provisions in the relation to environment, biodiversity, and nature protection. For example, Article 30 has the provisions of, fundamental rights that every citizens shall have the right to live in a clean and healthy environment. Similarly, Article 51 has mentioned the state policies in relation to protection, promotion, and use of natural resources. And the Schedule 5 to 9 of the Constitution has mentioned the distribution of state power, where all three tiers of government has the agenda of biodiversity in, the federal, provincial, and local governments' rights and responsibilities. The 15th five-year plan, so in the relation to forestry and biodiversity sector, so basically 3 milestones have been mentioned. One, landscape level biodiversity conservation, then increase production and contribute to economy. Then the third one, it is also related to today's presentation and discussion, that is support to environment friendly infrastructure development, because the forestry sector is not only talking about conservation, but it has also aimed to support to the environment friendly infrastructure development in the country, because we are in the stage of development, and there are a number of initiatives going on such infrastructure development in Nepal. So ultimately, it has goal of contributing to prosperity and happiness. So that is also the national goal of Nepal through sustainable forest management and entrepreneurship development. So there are some targets set by the end of plan period. So I think that is not regarding national forest policy. It has the goal of achieving prosperity through forestry sector, and one of the component is achieving environmental sustainability. That is clearly mentioned in this policy as well. So the government of Nepal in forestry sector, would like to see the environment friendly infrastructure, so that our future generations will have opportunity to live in a clean and healthy environment. Similarly, the Forest Act 2019 has some provisions for providing forest land for development projects. Basically, the section 42 has provision on providing forest land for development projects, and providing forest land for mineral exploration has been mentioned in section 43. Also, there is provisions of forest development fund, where the development projects for the use of forest land, they can deposit the amount of money based on the NPV calculation in this fund, if they are not able to provide land for land. And also there is the provisions of penalty in this Forest Act as well. So based on the Forest Act, the government of Nepal has formulated forest clearance guideline. It has mentioned clearly how the development projects need to carry out environment assessment and follow the procedures for obtaining forest land for development projects. For example, based on the thresholds, the development projects or infrastructure projects need to prepare environment assessment report. It could be brief environment study, initial environment examination, or environment impact study based on the magnitude and the extent of the impacts of the project. Then the Council of Ministers can decide on providing the forest land to projects. if demand from the respective ministry comes to the Ministry of Forest and Environment, then Minister for Forest and Environment forward that proposal to the Council of Ministers for approval. And there are two provisions. The development projects can provide land for using the forest land. If they cannot provide the land, so they can compensate it by depositing money in the Forest Development Fund. And there is also provision of compensatory plantation. That is now 1:10 in outside protected areas and 1:25 within protected areas. And there is monitoring mechanism established by the Ministry of Forest and Environment. Basically, the Department of Forest and Soil Conservation is responsible for monitoring of forest land provided to development projects. Then the National Parks and Wildlife Conservation Act. So it has been amended for 5 times. So last one in 2017. The Section 5 of the Act has, provisions works in the inside national parks and reserves, but the Section 6 has opened up, some provisions for operation of services, including hotel, public transportation inside national parks and reserves. Under this, act, so the government of Nepal has formulated working policies for construction of infrastructure inside protected areas in 2009. So this working policy basically highlights for developing hydropower projects inside protected areas. So there are few provisions. One is, monthly water discharge, that is at least 10% outside park and reserve and at least 50% inside park and reserve. But the community-based hydropower projects with less than 1 megawatt capacity is allowed even inside the protected areas. But in that case, the monthly discharge of water of at least 50% should be ensured. As I said earlier, the compensatory plantation for protected areas should be 1:25. If one tree is cut, then the proponent has to plant 25 trees as compensation. And like in the forest clearance guidelines, so this working policy has also made the monitoring mechanism, whether the projects has followed the provisions mentioned in the contractual document or not. The Department of National Parks and Wildlife Conservation can monitor based on these provisions of working policy. So recently, the government of Nepal has endorsed the wildlife-friendly infrastructure development guidelines. So basically, there are 3 categories of infrastructure: underpass, overpass, and other infrastructures. And also the areas categorized based on sensitivity. As I presented earlier, the protected areas and other highly sensitive areas like Ramsar sites that I presented, altogether 10 sites in Nepal. So national parks, wildlife reserve, biological corridor, Ramsar sites. So these are mentioned as highly sensitive area while developing infrastructures crossing these areas. Then sensitive areas, environment protection area, like Chure conservation area or Chure area. So that is also one of the categories of environment protection area. Then conservation area. So we have altogether 6, as I said earlier. Then forest conservation area. The Forest Act has the provisions of declaring forest conservation area, and we have already few forest conservation area in Nepal. then buffer zone and ecotone. So these are the sensitive areas. And there are standards, mentioned in this guideline as well. So regarding underpass, there are 4 categories for small wildlife species. So there are, dimensions of underpass. So I need not to, mention in detail. You can see in presentation itself, it is already clear. So for medium wildlife species, big wildlife species, and very big wildlife species. For very big wildlife species like wild elephant and rhino, so it has to be, constructed bridge, and also for big wildlife species, bridge to be constructed as an underpass for these animals. For overpass, so for wild elephant and rhino, so there are, few provisions mentioned here. And then species other than wild elephant and rhino, so other category, and then canopy bridge, especially for other, small animals. Then other structures, basically for irrigation canals, the ramp construction, pipeline that is, constructed or should be underground, then avian diverter, reflector, insulator in wires of transmission lines. So these are the few categories of wildlife friendly infrastructures that the linear infrastructure projects need to follow strictly while constructing, those infrastructure. And Environment Protection Act, that is, promulgated in 2019, and there are 6 thematic areas, and it has the goal of achieving clean and healthy environment, through, different provisions mentioned in this act. And there are 3 categories of environment assessment, as I said earlier. Brief environment study, so that is also the jurisdiction of local government. So after the federalization, the act has given responsibility of approving brief environment study and initial environment examination, even for the local government. Then for provincial government, so within their jurisdiction, they can approve brief environment study, initial environment examination, and environment impact assessment. And so is the case with federal government. So federal government can approve the environment assessment reports for national pride projects, projects approved by the investment board, interprovincial projects, and other projects that falls within the jurisdiction of federal government. So that is mentioned in the Environment Protection Act. So this is last slide in my presentation. There is Local Government Operation Act enacted in 2017. Because biodiversity, nature protection, environment, so according to Constitution of Nepal, so these agenda are, also the responsibility of local government. So this act has given responsibility to the local government for conservation, management, utilization, monitoring, and regulation of different categories of forests. But these legislative provisions should not contradict with the federal and provincial legislation. So this is also important while we, talk about the biodiversity, nature protection, environment, climate change. These areas are also, the rights and responsibility of local government. So having said all these, information, the Ministry of Forest and Environment has already provided almost 20,000 hectares of forest land to different categories of development projects, including linear infrastructure projects like roads, railways, transmission lines, and irrigation canals. So these 3, roads, railways, transmission line, and irrigation canals. These are the three major linear infrastructure projects in Nepal, and these projects, demand, large area of forest land. So while designing and constructing these infrastructure, so we need to keep in mind the concept of environment-friendly infrastructure development for achieving all three pillars of sustainability, that is economic, environment, and social. So with these words, so I would like to, thank you all for your kind attention. Thank you. If there are any queries, then I will be available later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you for your quite comprehensive presentation, particularly covering the all the legal and legislative instruments national level available for the environment, biodiversity, and natural capital protection. And you have also given the different agreement and convention where Nepal is also signatory. And you also highlighted the provision theme of the 15th plan to support the environment-friendly infrastructure. And another point you highlighted the responsibility of all three tiers of the government: federal government, provincial government, and local level government. And particularly the best part of your presentation is that the provision for the infrastructure development in all these different kind of the act, regulation, and the legal instruments. Thank you for that. With that, now I will request Mr. Gordon. The question answer. Mr. Gordon R. Keller for his presentation on bioengineering, soil slope stabilization, and hydrology in linear infrastructure. We are a bit running out of time. Please, requesting Mr. Gordon to keep his time. Thank you. And Mr. Gordon is working for the U.S. government in the U.S. Forest Service, spending about 40 years as a staff engineer and project manager in the United States. He has undertaken work in rural road design, road engineering best practices, and way to mitigate environmental damages for roads, with extensive work undertaken for organizations such as the World Bank, Mexican Transportation Institution, International Road Federation. Thank you. I will hand over the mic to Mr. Gordon. Thank you.
Good. Well, good afternoon. First, I'd like to thank Mr. Dakal and Mr. Bhatt and Mr. Singh and everyone here for the chance to be here and give this presentation. Let's see. What I'm talking about is soil bioengineering and hydrology. There are a couple of specific areas dealing with engineering, but I think they're important both because of good design and if we're talking about green roads and using natural capital, they're both elements of the natural capital, and for sustainability of our roads. So, when we talk about infrastructure kind of that we have to deal with, these are just the number of significant drainage structures that are between the Barindabar corridor and down to Hetula. Lots of structures. And if you go on down, if we go clear, say to Batwal to Pattaya, there's 220 kilometers of roads, and lots of roads, lots of structures, lots of vegetation we have to deal with. And so that's why I'm talking about both the vegetation part and the drainage issues. In soil bioengineering, it's a technology that integrates ecological principles using basically vegetation. And then there's kind of a subset of that is biotechnical slope stabilization, which is combining structures with vegetation, basically. And, I shouldn't be talking about this to you. You should probably be talking to me about this, because a great deal of the information developed on soil bioengineering has been developed here in Nepal. These publications by John Howell are both DOR publications, the Bioengineering for Green Infrastructure, the ADB publication. So Nepal has probably done more in terms of soil bioengineering than any other country that I know of. And, the things about the soil bioengineering is, there's a lot of different, you can choose what type of vegetation you want to use, whether it's plugs, whether it's tree cuttings, whether it's seeds. And of course, there's a lot of factors that have to go into it. You have to think like an agronomist or a gardener, perhaps, in terms of, what are the soil types? What are the moisture conditions? What's the weather like? What's your aspect? Where are you in the topography? And so, and it makes a lot of difference. Is it a north-facing slope? Is it a south-facing slope? Because that's going to make a difference of what selection of vegetation you choose. And here in Nepal, of course, you've got just an incredible range of different conditions, from the high mountains down to the Gangic Plain or the Terai, where we are now, and the little bit of the near Hetudha, you're in at the Silwakan formation. So you get into at least the two different formations that are here in the front country, which have fairly specific vegetation types. And these are just a list that has been put together. Like I say, I'm not familiar enough with Nepal here to know what vegetation one should be using where. And also, like from Hal's books there's this type of lists of vegetation. And so it really depends a lot on local knowledge, people who worked a lot with soil bioengineering in the local region. And so you folks, many of you are much more specialized and know much more about this than I do. What, there's, both there's the specific road issues, but there's drainage issues, there's slope issues. And so you'd have to decide, which type of bioengineering treatment would do best to help stabilize these type of areas and minimize erosion and maintain water quality. And if we look at applications along our road here, there's applications of just roadside treatments or how we might use the wood. There's applications in drainage stream banks. There's applications in slope stabilization, say behind retaining structures. And so there's just a lot of different applications for soil bioengineering. And some of the different areas, I put it into two different basic categories: erosion control and slope stabilization. So the erosion control, and I'll just show a few examples of each, is like turfing, fascines, drainage poles for erosion control. Slope stabilization is live stakes, brush layers, and vegetated walls. And I'll show you just some examples of each of these. Turfing is basically just covering the ground with vegetation. If the ground's covered, you don't have erosion problems. So you can roll out it, you can do it with seeds, you can make live vegetative barriers or clumping grasses to keep the soil in place. You can use these fascines, and some of them are just rolls of, a lot of these things depend on a type of species of vegetation that'll resprout. Salix, like a willow type thing is a very common one that we use in the western part of the world. But these are just, they can be the bundles of vegetation or bundles that have seed and fertilizer in them and growing mulch. You place them in the ground in trenches. And if they resprout or you water them, they'll regrow and you end up with a cover that looks like the left photo here. You're right, photo. Sometimes they can be used for pole drains. This isn't for major drainage, but for springs and seeps where little bits of water coming out. Live stakes are very commonly used in shallow slope failures. And we're not talking about major failure, not a major landslide, but just a little slump, something that isn't over a meter too deep. And they're something where the roots will help anchor the soil in place. Brush layering, another common treatment where in a cut slope, if it's fairly unstable, you can put in these layers of vegetation and really stabilize the slope. Slope grading is just another technique to cover typically steeper surfaces, but to get vegetation growing on it, to be able to physically hold the vegetation. These couple of photos on the right here were actually from China in Fuzhou, where the upper one is soon after treatment. They're using concrete as little containers for the vegetation, and below, after 2 years, you can hardly see those containers because the grass has grown up. Vegetated structures, which is a physical structure with vegetation. And slopes, vegetated reinforced slopes. This is actually an engineered structure, a reinforced slope, a soil slope with like geotextile or geogrids. It's a, some sort of a reinforcement, but you're putting in vegetation on each layer. So it's very useful technologies. And this is one that I think very much applies to many slopes along new road construction in any country. So that's a quick overview of the vegetation side. So now I want to move to the drainage side quickly. And drainage, it has several functions. One, you want to take care of surface water. You don't want it to concentrate. Two, you want to take care of the water in drainage channels. In other words, where you're going to install a bridge or a culvert, and you're typically designed for a 25 to 100-year event, and you want to make sure it'll pass the water plus sediment and debris, not just the water, but the sediment and debris. We need to reflect what's happening with climate change, and I'll discuss that in just a minute. And lastly, in many cases, in the context of these projects here that we're looking at, you want to be able to pass wildlife. So, from a drainage standpoint, I mean, we could spend an hour or a day talking about drainage design. There's a lot of different methodologies that are used here in Nepal and worldwide. The point is to come up with a design flow. And actually, I think if you don't have a lot of good historic data, you can, local knowledge is really invaluable. How high has the water gotten? And then assume in the future, it could get a little bit higher, a little bit deeper. And we need to reflect on climate change. We expect warmer temperatures. Precipitation may be less here in Nepal, but with drier winters and more extreme, more wet monsoon seasons, that means more extreme events, sequences of drought, and just a lot of uncertainty and a lot of climate variability and extremes that I think we're forecasting for here in Nepal. And so these extremes, if you're trying, looking at it, I'll be real quick here, but from an engineering standpoint, if you're using rational formula, one of the factors is rainfall intensity. How hard is it raining? And the recommendation is, if we look at the recurrence interval, we're thinking of maybe a 100-year event. Well, a 100-year event in the past, now, we may be receiving a 500-year event. So what that does, it raises us on this curve here, and rather than an intensity of, say, 400 millimeters per hour, we may have to go to 500 millimeters per hour. What that means is more flow, more design flow, more water coming down your drainage. And there's so we've got two things we're trying to work with here. One is just how to get the water through the structure. So this first nomogram here on your left is just typical of a federal highway nomogram of how to size a box culvert. Just how to get the water through a certain cubic meters per second through a certain size box. But then on the other side, we have wildlife crossings. And the last gentleman just showed us some of these sort of criteria. How big does that box have to be if we want to accommodate wildlife? And basically, in projects like this, in NHB Road, we need to accommodate both, particularly in corridors we've identified as key wildlife movement corridors. And so we choose whichever is the bigger of the two. And so we have bridges, we have culverts, particularly slab culverts, we have surface drainage and drifts or fords that we have to accommodate and get wildlife through. I just want to mention quickly here aquatic organism passage, because that's a huge issue in the western part of the world, and certainly in the western United States, because many of our culverts over the years have created basically barriers because of the increased velocity out of a culvert. And so we've gone to this concept of basically a stream simulation where we're using a natural stream channel bottom. And so wildlife can move up it, fish can move up it. And so this is something that applies particularly to a perennial stream where you have water, where you have fish or aquatic organisms, not as much to ephemeral channels. But then back at the wildlife crossing. So ideally is a bridge. And what we're doing is we're just taking advantage of a lot of structures. We're trying to be opportunistic, taking advantage of existing structures, particularly box culverts and bridges, and making sure that they are adequate to pass wildlife also. We'll look at a couple of these tomorrow in the field trip, particularly this Kair-Kola bridge site. I don't know if we'll get to Lothar, but these are a couple of the sites that are very suitable for wildlife movement. And sometimes, you know, for wildlife to move, if it's inundated most of the time, if there's a lot of water moving in it, we want some sort of a dry platform, someplace where the wildlife can be moving even when the main channel is flooded. We have the same issue with culverts. You know, if we can maintain a natural stream channel bottom, or it's more conducive to the movement of wildlife, it's not looking like a slab of concrete, it's looking like a natural bottom. And if the channel is like the bottom photos, if the channel is flooded most of the time, often we'll end up putting in little terraces or build up something that the wildlife can stay dry in. You know, bottom don't like to swim. Maybe they're not good swimmers. So, but if they can be on a dry ground, on a dry platform, then they can move through okay. Also, there's other barriers at times that we build into channels, like a little waterfall coming off, particularly where there's a concrete slab in the bottom, because that accelerates velocity. And so these can be barriers to some, particularly if they get very high, they can be barriers to some fish, or some fish and some wildlife. There's problems with just structures that are, you know, lack of capacity, too small. And that depends on the target species, but you know, if they're narrow, if they're partially plugged, if they've filled in with aggregate or graded, if they're small culvert pipes, those are all things that really limit what type of animal can go through these structures. So in this case, like bigger is better. We'll look at this this site here, this Charat called a slab culvert, another one of the field sites we'll look at tomorrow afternoon. And this is a good example of the one that's, you know, it's not so bad, but it's certainly not ideal, because you've got 3 different cells, each one's 3 meters wide. And today we'd be much better off to just go with a slab, a small bridge, rather than 3 of these cells. And with a lot of our prefabricated girders today, we can do that. And this is just a style, I think there's an old style when we didn't have a lot of these prefabricated concrete units. So better, better is more space, more span. Other little problems at times in structures when we build in, say, gabion shells, they're used as energy dissipators, but they also can be blocks to the movement of wildlife, or in a drift going up a channel, or if there's gabions that are built into it. You know, there are structures we build for other reasons, but they're barriers for wildlife movement. So we have to keep in mind that that, you know, maybe we don't want to do it quite that way because we're affecting wildlife movement. And other places are barriers or traps. Some of these drop inlets, you know, or energy dissipators or stair steps. These can, you know, again, either trap wildlife or be barriers to wildlife. So it's something that we have to think about in our designs. Also, just channels, culverts, or ditches. You know, if they're like the ones on the top there, they can be traps for animals, or certain species can't get across them. So they're a barrier to wildlife movement. If we have open ditches like on the bottom there, or even if it's, yeah, not necessarily grass, but if it's something that's open, then wildlife can get across it. So they're just other little things we need to be thinking about of what affects movement of wildlife. So in conclusion, you know, we want good vegetation management and good drainage design, because they both facilitate wildlife movement and they facilitate good engineering design and passing the design flows. It's critical that we have drainage structures that are big enough to pass your design flow, and most structures we want to last 25 to 100 years, depending on the type of structure. If it's a bridge, 100 years at least. And we want to pass water as well as debris and sediment. But last, we want to size those structures also to pass a wide variety of wildlife, and that's what some of the issues we've been talking about here. Either a wide variety of wildlife or target species. If we're talking about an elephant, a tiger, then they need to be big. So with that, I'll say thank you, and just a quick kind of overview of some of the issues that we deal with vegetation management along a road, and how we need to look at engineered structures in drainages, and which ones are wildlife friendly and which ones are problems that we maybe need to modify our designs on. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon, for your presentation on the bioengineering principle, particularly for the landside protection, slope stabilization, and erosion control. At the same time, you have highlighted the use of the vegetation structure as well as vegetation drainage system, and you have emphasized on the cross drainage works to be designed to accommodate the water discharge as well as the to increase the wildlife connectivity, the size of these cross drainage works should be enough to cater the targeted species or the wider range of the species. Thank you with that. Now we'll go for the question and answers. Particularly, we have received a few questions for the Dr. Woli in the chat box. First of all, we'll address the questions already received in the chat box. The first question is from Mr. Sushil Babu Dhakal. He is present here. Can you is to the Dr. Woli. Yes, Dhakal sir.
Thank you, Dr. Oli, for your very intensive and informative presentations. It matters and great to all of us. But I want to know, there is impact while executing the infrastructure at the field, yeah. But the impact of the probable potential impact shall be assessed, and it can be identified only from the study. So in some projects in Nepal, what we are facing that the concerned authority is not allowing it even for the examination and study. Is this a normal practice? Is it rational to prevent such type of studies to find the potential, potential impact because of the such infrastructure development? That is my questions, please.
Okay, so let me respond to the queries from project director, Mr. Sushil Dhakal. So basically, while assessing the impacts, so we follow the Environment Protection Act that is in place. So that act has made provisions for conducting environment assessment based on the threshold mentioned in the Environment Protection Regulations, Annex 1, 2, and 3. So Annex 1 highlights threshold for brief environment study, 2 for IE, and 3 for EIE. So that is the legal provision for assessing the impacts by the any development projects. So that is the legal provisions. And you raised the question of whether other mechanism of examining the impacts is in place or not. So right now, according to the legislative provisions, sorry, we follow the Environment Protection Act and regulations for identifying and mitigating impacts by any development projects. But the proponent has the right to conduct any impact assessment, study and preparing report. But in Nepal, in practice, the sincerity in preparing those reports is questionable. For example, in this particular Butol Naranghat highway, so while preparing environment assessment report, the study team mentioned that only 9,000 trees will be included for clearance during expansion of a highway. But while it goes to the divisional forest office and they did enumeration of trees, the number of trees reached 54,000. So there is, high discrepancy from 9,000 to 54,000. So these are the, practical issues of assessing and carrying out, the studies for identifying the impacts and, recommending the mitigation options. So far, we follow the legislative provisions mentioned in Environment Protection Act and Regulation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Alisha. There is another question for you. We discussed about the wildlife-friendly infrastructure construction guidelines. Is it legally binding for infrastructure department? A question from Karma Engine.
Yeah, this is, a legally binding instrument because the government has approved it. According to the, National Parks and Wildlife Conservation Act, so this guideline has been prepared, based on the, provisions in that act. So this guideline has been endorsed by the Council of Ministers and it is mandatory.
Thank you, sir. Another question from the Victor Tumilba. He's asking about can you suggest if there are also area of the gap in policy framework for making it mandatory to factor biodiversity conservation parameters in project design?
Yeah, I would like to, flag out two issues in relation to this, because for linear infrastructure projects, the provision mentioned in Forest Act of providing, land for land is somehow, not practical. So we need to think of providing, large area of land that is required by the linear infrastructure projects as a compensation to the, forest department or divisional forest office. That is the practical issue that we need to consider in future. Another, thing is that while planning and designing any infrastructure projects, the environmental aspects, including, cost associated to mitigate the environment impacts, is very minimal, because in Environment Protection Act and Regulation, so there is, provisions of environment mitigation costs, environment management action plan, and all those, provisions are mentioned. But while, designing and planning infrastructure projects, so maybe we have, neglected in the environment aspects, so that, these, the concept of environment friendly infrastructure development could not be materialized in practice. So we need to think in advance while, planning and designing the infrastructure projects for, allocating resources for environmental aspects also. So these are two issues.
Thank you, Dr. Wolisha. The last question in chat box for you, sir, is are reptile underpasses are also considered in these guidelines, or do we consider them as small wildlife? Also, when we say bridges, can upgraded of existing bridges be also considered for wildlife passes along a road?
Yeah, thank you. The Annex 2 of the guidelines has clearly mentioned that reptiles are included or categorized as small wildlife, and that has already been mentioned, because there are 4 categories of, wildlife. And Section 11 of that, guideline has mentioned provision of, improving the wildlife friendly infrastructure in the existing infrastructure as well, because the divisional forest office or concerned, protected areas office, they can, forward that proposal to the respective ministries if the request comes from the development infrastructure projects. So there is clearly provision of improving existing infrastructure to make wildlife friendly in Section 11. And in Annex 2, there is provision of small wildlife which include the reptiles as well.
Yes, Mr. Suresh is asking one question by
okay, sure.
Mike. Yeah.
Okay, so in one of your slides, you have listed down the procedural requirement for cutting the trees for any government project. So I would like to know if there is any way to shorten those steps, because I'd like to highlight two steps. One is the approval from cabinet for cutting down the trees, because during the selection of the project is most of the projects are endorsed by the parliament. So once the projects are approved or endorsed by the parliament, so if there is any chance to not to go to the cabinet for the approval of tree cutting, because it takes at least 2 or 3 months, because we need to prepare lots of documents and everything. And one more step, if there is any certain increase in the number of trees, we can avoid the requirement of revision of the EIA or the EMP, so that we can certain down the time requirement for these two steps. So I'd like to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will take your second question first. So regarding, revising the IE, or, basically revising the IE for decrease or increase of number of trees. So that is, considered by the Ministry of Forest and Environment. And I think the ministry is in process of revising that provision, of, deleting that provisions, if there is decrease or increase of number of trees, then no need to revise, IE, only for the, area of forest. When it, decreases or increases, only then the IE, needs to be revised. The first one regarding the forest clearance, procedure. So it is, somehow a practical issue how we deal with those in the field, because few projects, so if they take serious, then within the short duration of time, few projects have made that provisions practically. And the ministry at that time, when I was in the ministry, so we did not hear any complaint from few projects. But regarding your concern on forwarding the proposal of tree cutting to the Council of Ministers, so right now the ministry has forwarded the forest regulation based on Forest Act 2019, and I think that has already been in the notice of Ministry of Forest and Environment. So that could be resolved. The decision of cutting trees could be given to the respective divisional forest offices. Thank you.
Any other question regarding the presentation by Gordon Keller on bioengineering? If we don't have any query or question on the presentations, before the lunch, just Clara will present for a very short presentation for 5 minutes. Yeah, sorry. Karmaji, you want to say something?
Oh, I just wanted to know a very quick question for PD Sir's presentation. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
For PD Sir's presentation, there was, I think in one part, PD Sir had mentioned like the master plan for the, I think it was for the road sector or the transport sector. So is there any scope to have like a strategic level environmental assessment as part of the master plan? Would there be provision to do that?
Okay, thank you very much, Karmaji. Yeah, the master plan, under the TA of the ADB, it is already the conceptual is in place, and the master plan for the national highway networks will be prepared, considering the existing transportation system, and there is no scope of the environmental study in the master plan. Thank you very much.
Actually, if I may supplement on this a little bit to what Piri sir said, actually this new Environmental Protection Act and regulation, for the first time they have covered the need to conduct a strategic environmental assessment for policy and strategic level documents or studies that is prepared. So in a way, it has been legally mandatory to conduct ACA if there are these type of policy, master plan, or strategic documents are prepared. So this is legally guided now, Karmaji.
Clara for her presentation. Quick presentation.
We know that we are already tired and starving, but it's a very, very quick presentation to introduce you for the discussion on the third day. And I think it's for you to think till the third day about some questions. So in the afternoon on the third day, we will have two parts to discuss. So the main goal is to identify the needs and priorities for institutionalizing green roads and smart infrastructure to protect natural habitats and biodiversity in Nepal by discussion around 4 key areas. So policy, permitting, research, science, practice, implementation, and training capacity based management practices. So the participants will form groups, 4 groups, that cover each topic, both virtual and in-person participants that take part of the group discussion. Each group will have a leader and a note taker. Ideally, the group should include a high diversity of people with different backgrounds and skills. Each in-person participant group or leader will have a computer to connect with the virtual participants that will be part of the group. And for each group, we will provide a complete list of questions, but this is only some suggestions which will help to discuss and identify the challenges, the obstacles, and the needs required in Nepal going forward to change the practices. And already you discussed a little bit here in this morning. So this is some questions for policy, for research, for practice and implementation and training capacity in best management practices. We will share this document, this outline, and also the documents that you have to fill and after your discussion. This is other questions that can come up that doesn't fit in any of the other categories. The leader of the group will facilitate the discussion. The note taker will record the main points of the discussion, and in 1 hour they will define a list of challenges, obstacles, and needs. And this all will be listed in a Google Drive doc that we will share with you. That is the list of challenges, obstacles, and needs. So once the list is completed, the group will discuss one by one the needs identified in each category. This will allow for clarification what the need consists of and will allow for some needs to be revised, removed or combined with like needs. So for each need should be assigned what are the challenges and who could be in charge to fulfill these needs. So each group leader will share the list of challenges, obstacles, and needs to all group of the list of needs associated with the challenge with other participants to get feedback. So, and then we have a tea break, and then all that list will be voted for by all participants. So then I will provide you the link to vote, and then you rank what is the priority in terms of all the needs and obstacles that each group provided. So after that, go back to the groups and determine what will be the action, timeline, and your suggestions of responsible for the action. So for each priority, each group will identify all these need, justification, responsibility, and timeline, and will be filled in a form that is in a Google Drive link. And this will help to provide inputs from you to and contributions for the action plan that we have to prepare in the end of this workshop. Thank you very much for your time. So we will share the documents in paper here for the participants and the Google link to the virtual participants. Thank you very much.
आफ्नो ग्रुपमा छलफल गर्दै के इस्यु हुन सक्छ A3 मा हाम्रो जुन सेकेन्ड हाफमा एक्सन प्लान बनाउने भनेको छौं नि त्यो एक्सन प्लानमा चाहिँ यहाँहरुले डिस्कसन गरेका पोइन्टहरुलाई लास्टमा गएर रिफ्लेक्ट गर्नुपर्छ नम्बर 1 नम्बर 2 क्वेशन टु यु क्लारा अगेन इज are we giving particular thematic area to each table or all the 4 areas will be discussed by every group?
The thing is, to be more organized, each group will have a topic.
Exactly.
Then they share all the challenges and needs, and the other participants can contribute too. You know, and then they vote. Everybody will vote for what is the priority in terms of needs for Nepal or for each topic.
For each topic. So all the 4 areas will be discussed by each group.
Exactly.
Right? Well, यो जुन चारवटा क्लाराले अघि भन्नुभयो नि हैन एउटा पोलिसी भयो नम्बर 1 तपाईहरुले टिप्नु भए पनि हुन्छ है नम्बर 1 पोलिसी भयो है नम्बर 2 रिसर्च एन्ड साइन्स भनेको रिसर्च एन्ड डेभलपमेन्टको कामहरु गर्ने त्यो एउटा त्यो भयो तेस्रो भनेको प्र्याक्टिस एन्ड इम्प्लिमेन्टेसन हैन हामीले चाहिँ नि प्र्याक्टिस र इम्प्लिमेन्टेसनमा भोलि एक्सन प्लान बनाउँदाखेरि कहाँनिर हामीले ग्याप्सहरु छ र कहाँनिर हामीले चाहिँ नि यसलाई स्ट्रेन्थन गर्न सक्छौं भन्ने चाहिँ नम्बर 3 भयो नम्बर 4 चाहिँ ट्रेनिङ एन्ड क्यापेसिटी बिल्डिङ क्यापेसिटीको चाहिँ यदि कमी छ भने हामीले क्यापेसिटी बिल्डिङको सबै खाली चाहिँ कोही गरेर अध्ययन मात्रै गरेर क्यापेसिटी बिल्डिङ हुँदैन त्यसले गर्दा क्यापेसिटी बिल्डिङ र नलेज डेभलपमेन्टका डिफरेन्ट टुल्सहरुलाई चाहिँ हामी कसरी युटिलाइज गर्न हामी पनि हरेक ग्रुपमा आएर यहाँहरुलाई सपोर्ट पनि गर्छौं एउटा ग्रुप त्यो भयो त्यसरी चारवटा ग्रुपमा हामीले डिभाइड गरेको छौं र त्यो चारैवटालाई चाहिँ चारैवटा थीमेटिक एरियामा अहिलेदेखि नै हामीले लेख्दै जाउँ
ओके होइन त्यो डिवाइड गर्छौं okay one small amount announcement before we depart for the lunch and subsequent site visit to NB Road. Actually the program is designed in such a way that all the participants are requested to just make the notes of what you saw observed in the field visit today so that in your group tomorrow you need to discuss and recap the today's visit tomorrow. That's why please don't forget to note down what you have discussed, what you have observed, that kind of the points. One is that. Second point, I would like to request Yuvrajji, when all the participants need to be gathered at the lounge there for the site visit. Karmaji, any message for us?
No. Thank you very much. I think we did pretty well learning this new modality of hybrid event. So thank you very much. And I really wish I was there in person.